So I'm going to say a few words about Friends and who we are in order to talk about Overflow Action Day and the initiative. I'll talk about combined sewer overflows. We'll talk about stormwater management, and then last but not least, Overflow Action Days. All right. So now that you all can hear me, so Friends is a 41-year-old organization. We're dedicated to protecting and improving the Chicago River for people, plants, and wildlife. We do that through 3 programs, so our education and outreach. Some of you on this call, if you're familiar with Friends, you've probably participated in our Chicago River Day. And so that's part of our education and outreach. It's a watershed-wide cleanup day once a year. And then we've got our on-the-ground projects. So you can see some folks are planting native plants here. We also put up osprey poles for nesting habitat. By clearing invasives and planting natives, that creates turtle habitat. And then our policy and planning, which is where I come in. So I'm the policy specialist at Friends. And so I work with elected officials, getting them to educating them on policy, on river-related issues that they then can use to inform policy. And then obviously, as the river is improving and people are being drawn to it, a lot more planning is happening along that. So we work with developers to make sure that they're planning responsibly. And then I just like to point out to folks that a lot of people think of Friends and they think of the main stem, but we cover this watershed here in the red. So we've got the North Branch and the main stem and the South Branch, and then the Calumet, Little Calumet, and the Chicago Sanitary and Shipping Canal. So it's a big watershed. It covers 2 states, a couple of counties, 156 miles of waterways. 75% of that is natural shoreline. And we've got lots of open space along that and lots of people within the river system. So that's just a little bit about Friends if you weren't already familiar. All right, so let's talk about combined sewer overflows. So this is how the system works on a dry day. Just like today, you will have all of your wastewater coming from your homes, and if it were normal times, from our businesses and factories, you know, when you're at work, all of that wastewater gets carried off into these pipes. And it gets taken to the wastewater treatment facility, it gets treated, and then it gets released into the Chicago River. And again, on a dry day, this all works perfectly fine. The illustration is by no means to scale, but the idea here is that there's plenty of capacity for all of that wastewater, all of the flushes of our toilets and dishwater and shower water. There's plenty of capacity for all of that. And it works just fine, the system, on a dry day. However, it's a different story on a wet weather day, a rain event, or if there's been a heavy snow and then a warm day and all of that melts. All of that water is being carried off of our streets. It's hitting our roofs and being carried off as well. And all of that combines with the water that we, on an average day, are using in our homes. So all of that water gets carried still to the wastewater treatment facility, treated and released. However, when there's too much rain all at once, that will overwhelm the system. And in order to prevent basement backups, flooding, in order to not do any damage to our wastewater treatment facilities, that water then gets taken into these tunnels and into a reservoir. And so that water stays there untreated until the wastewater treatment facility has capacity, and then they'll pump that back up and they'll treat it. And that also gets treated and released into the river. So worst case scenario, that the system is so overwhelmed that it flows out through one of our outfalls. And there are 393 outfalls within the MWRD's boundaries. And the MWRD is the Metropolitan Water Reclamation District. So when I'm talking about wastewater treatment facilities, those are the folks that are treating them, and they're responsible for these pipes and the reservoir and the treatment of the wastewater that we send to them. Obviously, when the system is overwhelmed and untreated sewage, everything off the streets, when that gets into our river system, that's not safe for people, that's not safe for plants and animals. It's unsafe. So it diminishes the water quality. So it's not ideal. And one of the big advocacy pieces at Friends is to advocate for the elimination of combined sewer overflows. These pipes, and so this is our gray infrastructure. If I can go back. So the pipes and the tunnels that I was just describing, all of this is our gray infrastructure, or people-made infrastructure. And it used to work. And Chicago's not the only city with a combined sewer system. But what's happening is that with climate change, with changing weather, the rain events are becoming more extreme, they're becoming more frequent, and so we are getting more flash flooding, which is leading to more erosion, more pollution in our runoff. So it's these extreme weather events that are putting way too much pressure on this great infrastructure that wasn't built for that. And so that's why there's this problem, and why Friends is advocating for, as I'll talk about, green infrastructure and nature-based infrastructure. So as I just mentioned, so there's green stormwater infrastructure. The idea here is to mimic nature. And so you've got something like in the middle here, like I just Googled rain barrel and I Googled green alleys and a bioswale. So these are some examples of a green stormwater infrastructure. This person here has disconnected their downspout. Now that runs into a rain barrel. It's relatively clean water. You've held that water where it landed. It's not rushing off into the sewer system. You can use that water to water plants afterwards. Green alleys, as they're sometimes called, these permeable pavers. You've got space in between the pavers, and so water can infiltrate there. And this works unlike a regular surface street where water hits and then just runs off into the pipes. This is allowing the water to sink in. And so that's what I mean by imitating nature. We are keeping it where it falls. And then on the right-hand side, this bioswale, it's kind of a U-shaped structure. Rain falls in there. Then you've got all these nice plants, hopefully natives, that have nice long roots that are pulling water into the earth. And again, keeping it where it falls, not sending it immediately to our wastewater treatment facilities. So a slight nuance here with nature-based infrastructure. Nature-based infrastructure are investments made to enhance or protect or expand natural areas, already existing natural areas. So this is a picture of the Skokie Lagoons just last year. They have an incredible capacity, ability to store stormwater, and it's just nature. So obviously it's good for people because you can bike and walk alongside of it. Access to nature is so important. It's great for wildlife because it's habitat. Friends does, as I mentioned earlier, turtle habitat restoration when we remove invasive species and plant natives. In a way, we say that that is also providing stormwater benefit because again, if we're planting the natives, and I'll show an image in a moment that compares the root structure of those. So natives pull in the water, rainwater deeper into the earth. And then, of course, from my job and my perspective, when I talk with elected officials, a lot of them are very excited by all of the wonderful habitat benefits, but they want to know this triple bottom line, which is that it's not only beneficial for the environment, but it's beneficial for people. So there's economic benefits. Friends did this economic study on the return on investment. So I definitely encourage you to go to our website and check that out. But so it's been proven that when you enhance green and blue ways, that brings in economic benefits. And then there's, of course, the social benefit of access to nature. I'll talk a little bit more about that in a slide. So this is what I was referring to about our turf grass versus our native plants. So I live across the street from a park district park, and the majority of it is turf grass. And so I know that only 28% of rainwater that lands there is infiltrating. I often see it if we've had a lot of rain. I often see huge puddles out there. Versus our native plants, which have much longer roots, they go in much deeper into the earth, and so they're pulling all of that water with them, and only 12% of water is running off. So this is why Friends promotes native plants, one of the reasons. Aside from the beauty and the habitat that it's providing, again, it's providing stormwater benefits. Another reason we promote our nature-based infrastructure is that you can see here this image is, we've got our gray infrastructure at the top. So think back to the first couple slides with the pipes and the tunnels and our treatment facilities, going down to like cisterns or reservoirs, and then those images of the bioswale or a rain garden or a rain barrel, all the way down to something like the Skokie Lagoons. As you move down, the cost and complexity goes down. The cost and complexity of figuring out how to build tunnels underground and reservoirs and where you're going to put those, it's hugely expensive and complex. And it's also much less resilient and requires much more maintenance. The moment you lay in a pipe, things can happen. You've got cracks, you have to repair them, you have to replace them. The value of them depreciates the moment they're put in. Versus our nature-based and green infrastructure, those are things that only get better with time. The more established those plants become, the longer the roots are going to become. Again, the more established they'll be, and so they're pulling in stormwater, and they require much less maintenance than our heavy gray infrastructure. So, you know, it's an all-around win-win for that. Of course, now more than ever, we know how important our access to public open spaces have been. This was from a New York Times article just a couple years ago. All this, there's so much research nowadays about how just being in a neighborhood park, like it doesn't have to be some exotic, far out place. Just being able to see trees, being able to walk outside in some green spaces, it does all this great stuff for us. It lowers our stress and decreases blood pressure. And doctors have even begun prescribing nature. So we know that our gray infrastructure, those pipes, those tunnels, those reservoirs are mainly unseen. You can't see them when they're underground, but you can see big open parks that we know are managing stormwater, and we get all of those additional benefits from them. And then, of course, to bring in environmental justice, this is a little bit dated, this Tribune article, but the idea here is that the city actually has a open space standard. It's supposed to be 2 acres per 1,000 people. Obviously, definitely in 2011, we weren't meeting that standard. And how that connects to stormwater management is that, again, if all of our surface areas are paved streets, if there's not a lot of open space, the moment that rainwater hits, it's getting sent off to the sewer system, and it's overwhelming it, and it's causing flooding and basement backups in those areas. And we know that flooding hits our poorest communities the hardest. And so CNT also did a study where they looked at flood damage insurance claims, and they found that 87% of them were in minority communities. So at Friends, we want to be thinking about, we're not just advocating that we need more open spaces and green spaces, but we want to be really strategic so that we are putting them in areas that need them the most. And so that brings me to Overflow Action Days, the initiative. So you've got all of that, the gray infrastructure. Not everyone, like I'm a renter in a building, I can't put in a rain barrel or plant a native plants garden. So the one thing I can do, and that every single Chicagoan can do, is lessen the amount of water that they're using on rainy days. So when you get an Overflow Action Day email, that's actually coming from me. And I try to send them out before we get a heavy rainstorm. The idea here is that like 24 hours to 48 hours beforehand, you start thinking about your water use, you're lessening it, the storm hits, and then hopefully 24 to 48 hours afterwards, you can be lessening your use as well. And so we send those alerts out. I keep an eye on if it says we're going to get 0.3 of an inch or more, that's what triggers me to send out the alert, because the MWRD has said that it just takes 0.3 of an inch. Not all throughout Chicago, but in certain areas of Chicago, that's as little as it takes to trigger a CSO. So when I see that we're going to get that much or more, I send out the alert. And again, it's an attempt to relieve pressure on the system. The idea that, like, if we all take this action at once, then we can be helping to lessen how much water is being sent to our wastewater treatment facilities so that they can manage all of that stormwater that's coming in. And then as far as where we're going from here, so those of you that do get the message, which I can back up, in order to get the Overflow Action Days alerts, please go to our website. You can quickly find it and sign up. And so you'll get these notices. They're just reminders. And so we've started to send out dry weather messaging, which I think I've now sent out 2 since we started that. The idea being that we're sort of keeping top of mind that water conservation is important always. And so we can be thinking about, for example, the one I sent, I think just a couple months ago, with fall, all the leaves falling to the ground. The message was around making sure to gather up all those leaves because, of course, if we leave them, then that can contribute to nutrient pollution because they've got phosphorus and nitrogen as that's breaking down. And if leaves aren't cleaned and cleared at the next storm, they're all washed into our storm drain. So anyways, long story short, the dry weather messaging is sort of related to like what's happening. Like if I send one out again in the next month or 2, it'll be about road salts. So that's what we've started recently. We're definitely wanting to broaden the reach of this initiative. So presentations like today, I'll also be reaching out with elected officials. So I've got some partners down here like the MWRD. We've had lots of support from U.S. Senate, U.S. reps and senators. Aldermen are on board. We've had conversations with them. But the idea is that we'll be pushing out harder, just asking them to, as simple as including it in their newsletters that they send out to constituents so that either they can get signed up or they're just reminded that on rainy days to be conserving water. And then I believe, so this initiative started in 2016. And around that time, there was this push to have April declared like an Overflow Action Days month. And so I think we're going to try to do something similar in the coming years where we sort of have like a hard push in the spring. And the idea behind that would be that our last, I forget the stat, but just like the last 2 or 3 springs have been the most as far as rainfall in the past however many years. So springtime is definitely a big OAD time to be thinking about your water use. So kind of making like a month out of it and really raise awareness. And then you all obviously are interested in this to some extent. So I would love to hear if you've got any questions or comments or suggestions, ways that we could be pushing out OAD more, or what you think we could incorporate it into with maybe other initiatives that you're aware of. And with that, I'll leave out my email address and my office number, which I do check at least once a week. So if you'd like to reach out that way. But otherwise, I'd like to open it up to questions if there are any. And by all means, if you want to unmute, like Molly just put in a question, I can read it. Or if you wanted to unmute and ask more, you can. So I'll get started with Molly's question. She asked, do you think it might be possible to send alerts via text in the future? That's a great question, I think, because they took over this initiative a little just this last like spring. I've been sort of digging through the files to see what we've done up to this point, and I want to say that we looked into that. I'm pretty sure there's like a service and a fee, so maybe that's why we haven't done it, but I really appreciate that suggestion, Molly. And so I will look more into that. Did anyone else have any questions? Oh, awesome, there's some stuff coming in. So we've got a river docent, wow, since 2012. Okay, so how close are we to 365 days a year that the river is swimmable and fishable? Because if you're not already aware, that is actually, the Clean Water Act requires that our river, that water bodies in the US are swimmable and fishable. So that has to do with a lot of water quality. Well, since we still have CSOs, Friends, our policy is, so many of you might know, we do like canoeing cleanups. We don't get on the water. I believe it's within at least 24 hours, but it could be up to 48 hours within a CSO. The fact that we're still having CSOs means that we wouldn't be able to get on the water 365 days a year. We're definitely a lot closer than you probably were in 2012. I think the Thornton Creek Reservoir came online 2015, 2016. So even that has drastically reduced the number of CSOs. It's called the TARP, the Tunnel and Reservoir Plan, TARP. That's MWRD's plan to have all these reservoirs and tunnels completed, which will increase the capacity that they can hold. So we're getting there, Claudia, definitely, but it is 2020 and we're not there yet. There was another question, does the Clean Water Act apply to the ship and sanitary canal? I would think so, yes, that's gonna be, but you make me want to double check that. But I'm gonna say for now that yes, it should apply to the sanitary and ship canal. All right. Oh, okay. So Doug jumped in and said that the MWRD said CSO wait 48 hours. The Chicago River Swim has adopted 72 hours. And then he's got a question. The number of CSOs has gone down dramatically since TARP. What is the old number and what is the new number? As far as like annual, I was just doing this math because I was curious how many CSOs we had in the winter time, because again, people don't often associate winter and a threat of CSOs because it's not heavy rainstorms. But as I mentioned earlier, if we have a heavy snowstorm and then a warm day, all of that melts, and that could be a lot going to the system at once. So I want to say, well, I know for sure in the last 4 years, in the months of December to February, we've had 22 CSOs. And I want to say that the years prior to that, that it was closer to like 30 or 40. And that's just for those winter months. But Doug, I can get back to you on more concrete numbers. All right, are there more quarries or reservoirs being brought online? As far as I know, TARP, they're just finishing the McCook Reservoir. I don't think there's any, as far as I know, that the MWRD does not have plans to do additional quarries and reservoirs beyond McCook once they finish that one. Oh, cool. So my colleague, John Quayle, is on the line. And by all means, John, please jump in. Many of you probably know him. So yeah, do you want to jump in?
Yeah, I can. Thanks, Chelsea. I spent more time dealing with TARP than I probably like to talk about, but I can answer some of these questions that you've been answering for some of the participants today. So the fishable, swimmable one, as Chelsea said, TARP is supposed to be done in 2029, but one of the really important things to remember is that TARP was designed in the late 60s with rainfall data from the 40s. So it doesn't account for climate change. So that's a big issue with TARP. So when it is done, we're not necessarily, we certainly won't have zero combined sewer overflows. That's going to require green infrastructure and lots of other things to deal with climate change. So we're closer than we have been, but I think we're still a ways away from, zero combined sewer overflows into the river. Clean Water Act applies to every body of water in the United States, even if it's just a pond in your backyard. So oftentimes people that are advocating for additional pollution will claim that bodies of water like the Sanitary and Ship Canal that have been highly modified or dredged or straightened or those kind of things don't qualify as natural bodies of water. They are 100% wrong. If it's got water in it and it's got fish in it, it's a natural body of water and it's regulated by the Clean Water Act. Doug's question about the CSO number. The CSO number, so this kind of goes back to the climate change thing. So we have seen a reduction in CSOs. We've especially seen a huge reduction in CSOs that go out to Lake Michigan. So if you lived in Chicago 20 years ago, there were many more times per year that we saw discharges to the lake. That number has gone down dramatically, but we still see, dozens and dozens of combined sewer overflows into the river every year. So a lot of that is happening in the river still, where we have seen a big reduction in the lake. And then the question about the quarries. This is kind of an interesting one because we do have, as Chelsey said, the second lobe of the McCook quarry is due to come online in 2029. But at the same time, the MWRD is reducing the capacity of the Thornton quarry. So we are losing some capacity over this time. A lot of people, Chelsey pays close attention to what the MWRD is doing, but not too many people do. And right now, while they are publicizing their capacity in Thornton, they are also losing capacity in Thornton over the next few years that they're not publicizing nearly as much. So that is going to provide additional sort of challenges in the Calumet area of the watershed. And then the organizations beating the drum loudest for the creation of green infrastructure, I'll say Friends of the Chicago River is, but groups like Open Lands, we work with a variety of groups, the Sierra Club, Open Lands, that look at water resources and all of this type of stuff. And it's a pretty strong coalition that we work together all the time. And then the question about the sewage plants in Stickney. On the Chicago River, we have 5 sewage plants that discharge to the river. 2 are in Lake County, and 3 are in Cook County. Stickney is the furthest downstream. There's another plant in Calumet that also discharges to the river, and then the Terry O'Brien plant on Oakton in Skokie also discharges to the Chicago River. So I will be quiet now.
No, that was great, John. Thanks for jumping in. But I do feel like maybe David's question, there's some nuance there because it's the MWRD plant in Stickney, the only place for treated sewage. Like it makes me think of, so the O'Brien plant treats and they use UV. And also too, by the way, folks, it's 12:30. So by all means, I'm happy to stay a few minutes longer and answer the remaining questions. But if you've got places to be or lunch to eat, thank you so much for being here. I really appreciate it. So David, your question made me think about that because Stickney, John, jump in here, is not treating, correct?
Well, so there's a little bit of jargony stuff here. So that what 99% of the sewage treatment plants in the United States do 3-stage treatment. So they do a biological treatment, basically a gravity treatment, and then they do disinfection. So we have all 3 of those stages at the O'Brien plant and at all the plants that discharge into the Chicago River except for Stickney. Stickney right now only has the primary and secondary treatment. They do not have disinfection, and that's one of the things that we are advocating for at the MWRD is to add disinfection at that plant. That's the final stage to really address biological concerns with wastewater effluent that can affect human health. And that's not happening down there that we think it should.
Awesome, thank you. Yeah, because O'Brien uses UV to disinfect, and then the Calumet one uses chlorination and then dechlorination, right? Is how they, if you're talking, John, you're on mute.
Yep, that's
so
right.
Maybe
Sorry about that. You're right. Yeah.
Okay. No, Okay, cool. And then I did get a question from Nikki, if she's still on, about how much would low flush toilets affect OAD. I probably couldn't quantify that for you, but I would say that every single thing you can do to lessen the amount of water you are sending to the pipes, so whether that's low flush toilets or shower heads that are low flow or anything like that, any appliances that you get that are updated and use less water, all of that is going to be helpful. So that's a great question. And then it looks like probably our last question here, why would Mwrd reduce the capacity of the Thornton Reservoir? So I'll take a crack at this, and then John, if you want to supplement. So as far as I understand, it's like they've rented out the quarry, and then they could purchase it from the people they've been renting it out from, and they don't want to, or the figure is too high, and so they're choosing not to, and they're returning the quarry back to the people that they've been renting it from. John, did that cover it?
That's right. That's exactly right. Yeah.
Oh, cool. Okay. Yeah. So that would be why, Larry. All right. Well, thank you all again so much for spending your lunch with me. And by all means, please reach out if you've got any follow-up questions at all. I'm happy to answer them. Otherwise, take care. Have a nice day.